The sun was going down when Jake heard someone crying for help. He was working on his water pipes near his farm. The sound was loud and scared. Jake dropped his tools and ran toward the forest. His farm was at the edge of the woods on a planet called Havens Ridge. He pushed through the tall grass and ran between the trees. The cry came again, but weaker this time. Someone was hurt badly. Jake ran faster toward the sound. His heart was beating hard in his chest. He had to find whoever was making that terrible sound. The forest was getting darker as the sun dropped lower. Jake almost missed her in the shadows. A huge tree had fallen and trapped someone underneath. He got closer and saw it was a young woman. Her skin had a blue color to it. She was Valerie. The Valari were the native people of this planet. Humans and Valari did not talk much to each other. Most humans were scared of the Valari. Most Valari did not trust humans. But Jake did not think about any of that right now. The woman was trapped and bleeding. Her leg was stuck under the big tree trunk. Blood was coming from cuts on her arms and face. When she saw Jake coming, she looked very afraid. Her eyes went wide and she tried to pull away. Jake stopped and held up his hands to show he meant no harm. He spoke softly even though he knew she probably could not understand his words. He said it was okay and he was there to help. The young woman tried to move her leg and screamed in pain. Jake could see the problem was very bad. The tree was too heavy for one person to lift. But Jake was an engineer before he became a farmer. He knew how to solve problems. He ran back to his truck and grabbed everything he needed. He took rope and a small machine that could pull heavy things. He grabbed poles made of wood. He took his medical kit too. When he got back to the fallen tree, he showed the woman each tool before he used it. He pointed to the rope and made lifting movements with his hands. She watched him, but she was too hurt and scared to do anything. Jake tied the rope to another tree that was still standing. He set up a system of pulleys that would let the machine do the hard work. He worked fast but carefully. He tested every knot to make sure it was strong. The Valari woman watched everything he did. Her eyes followed his every move. When Jake was ready, he turned on the machine. It made a humming sound and the rope got tight. Slowly, the big tree started to lift up. The woman gasped as the weight came off her leg. Jake watched the rope and watched her face. He did not want to hurt her more. When the tree was high enough, Jake put wooden poles under it to hold it up. Then he helped the woman pull her leg free. She bit her lip to stay quiet, but tears ran down her blue cheeks. Jake opened his medical kit and pulled out a small device. It could check for broken bones inside the body. He held it up and showed it to her first. She looked scared of the device. Jake moved it slowly over her leg. It made beeping sounds. The device showed that her leg bone was broken, but there was no bleeding inside. That was good news. Jake got out cleaning wipes and bandages. He pointed to each one before he used it. He wanted her to know he was trying to help. When he started cleaning the cuts on her leg, she grabbed his arm hard. Her grip was very strong. She stared into his eyes. Jake thought she might hit him, but then she slowly let go of his arm and nodded. She understood he was helping. Jake cleaned all the wounds as gently as he could. He wrapped her leg in a tight bandage. He could not fix the broken bone here in the forest, but he could keep it still so it would not get worse. When he finished, Jake gave her his water bottle. She looked at it for a few seconds, then took a small drink. The water seemed to make her feel better. Jake also had a sandwich in his pack. He broke it in half and gave her a piece. She smelled it first, then took a tiny bite. Her eyes got big with surprise. Whatever she thought it would taste like, this was different. She ate the rest quickly. Jake smiled. Food was something everyone could understand. Now Jake had to get her home. He looked at her broken leg and knew she could not walk far. He found 2 strong branches and used rope to make a crutch. It was not pretty, but it would work. He showed her how to use it and helped her stand up. She was almost as tall as Jake. She leaned on the crutch and took a few steps. Each step made her face show pain. Jake stayed close in case she fell. They walked slowly through the forest. Jake knew roughly where Valari land started. He had always stayed on his side of the border. Every few minutes they stopped so she could rest. During these breaks, Jake noticed she was studying him. She was not as scared anymore. Now she looked curious. She pointed at his medical device and said something in her language. Jake did not understand the words, but he knew what she wanted. She wanted to know about the device. He showed her the screen. He pointed to the picture of her leg bone and the break. He made a braking motion with his hands. Then he showed how the bandage was holding it steady. She touched the device very carefully. She seemed amazed by the glowing screen. Jake had forgotten how strange technology must look to someone who never used it before. For him, it was just a tool. For her, it was probably like magic. After a long time walking, they reached a path. The young woman said something and pointed forward. Jake understood. She could make it from here, or her people would find her soon. He started to turn back, but she grabbed his arm again. She looked him in the eyes and spoke slowly in broken human language. She asked his name. Jake told her his name was Jake Morrison. She nodded seriously and said her name was Kira. She said she would remember what he did. She said she would tell her people. Jake helped her sit on a big rock by the path. He made sure she had his water bottle. He gave her a whistle from his emergency kit in case she needed to call for help. Then he did something that surprised even himself. He took off his jacket and put it around her shoulders. The evening was getting cold and she was probably in shock. Kira pulled the jacket tight and nodded thanks. Jake stood there not sure what else to do. Finally, he just waved and started walking back to his farm. The walk home took less time without someone hurt to help. Jake thought about what he had just done. He helped a Valeri woman. Most humans would say that was crazy. The two groups were not at war, but they were not friends either. There had been fights and deaths over the years. Some humans wanted to push the Valeri off the planet. Some Valeri wanted all humans to leave. But Jake never believed in judging whole groups of people. Kira was hurt and needed help. That was all that mattered to him. By the time he got back to his farm, the sun was completely gone. His water pipes were still broken. His tools were still on the ground where he dropped them. Jake picked everything up and put it away. He would fix the pipes tomorrow. Tonight he was too tired. He went inside and heated up some food. He ate dinner while looking out the window at the dark fields. He wondered if Kira made it home safely. He wondered if her people would be angry that a human touched her. He wondered if he would ever see her again. Jake finished eating and cleaned up. He took a long shower. His muscles hurt from carrying equipment through the forest. He knew he would be sore tomorrow. But he felt good about what he did. Maybe it would not matter. Maybe it would change nothing between humans and Valeri. But he helped someone who needed help. That was enough. That was always enough. He went to bed and fell asleep fast. He was too tired to dream. He had no idea that everything was about to change. He had no idea that his simple act of kindness would spread out like ripples in water. He had no idea that tomorrow morning would bring something completely unexpected. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, Jake slept well knowing he did the right thing. Jake woke up to a strange sound. At first he thought he was dreaming. But the sound was real. It was drums. Deep drums beating in a steady rhythm. The sound came from outside his house. Jake sat up in bed and listened. This was not human music. This was something old, something that spoke of ceremony and tradition. Jake got dressed fast and went to the window. What he saw made him stop breathing for a second. His whole front yard was full of Valeri warriors. Jake started counting and stopped at 50. There must be at least 100 of them. Maybe more. They stood in perfect rows wearing armor made of leather and bone. Each warrior had a tall spear stuck in the ground in front of them. Their blue skin seemed to shine in the morning light. They were not moving or talking. They just stood there looking at his house. Jake felt his heart start to race. This could not be good. He must have done something wrong when he helped Kira. Maybe he was not supposed to touch her. Maybe he broke some rule he did not know about. Jake walked slowly to his front door. Each step felt heavy. Part of him wanted to call for help. He had a radio that could reach the human settlement. But something made him stop. The warriors were not attacking. They were not breaking things or threatening him. They were just standing there waiting. Jake took a deep breath and opened the door. He stepped out onto his porch. 100 pairs of eyes turned to look at him. The morning was cool and quiet except for the drums still beating somewhere. Jake raised his hand in a wave. He did not know what else to do. Then the warriors in the center moved apart. They made a path down the middle. Through this path walked the biggest Valeri Jake had ever seen. The male was at least 7 feet tall. His shoulders were as wide as a door. His blue skin was covered in swirling patterns and markings. He wore fancier armor than the others. This was clearly a leader, maybe a chief. Behind him walked 2 warriors helping someone walk between them. Jake felt his chest get tight when he saw it was Kira. She looked much better than yesterday. Her leg was wrapped in proper bandages. She still needed help to walk, but her face had good color. Her eyes were bright. She smiled when she saw Jake. She said something to the big male beside her. The chief stopped about 10 feet from Jake's porch. Up close, he was even bigger. His face was serious but not mean. He looked like someone who had fought many battles and made hard choices. When he spoke, his voice was deep and powerful. But his human language was clear and careful. He said Jake's name, and Jake nodded. The chief said his name was Torak. He was the war chief of the Cathara tribe. Kira was his daughter. He pointed to the young woman Jake had helped. Torak said Kira told him everything. How Jake found her trapped. How he could have walked away. Many humans would have walked away. But Jake stayed. He used his tools and knowledge to free her. He gave her medicine and food and water. He helped her get back to Valeri lands even though humans were not welcome there. Jake showed honor when he could have shown nothing. Jake did not know what to say. He spoke the truth simply. He said he just did what anyone should do. She needed help. He could not leave her there. Torak's serious face softened a little. He said that was exactly why they were here. Among the Valeri, such actions create a debt. Not a debt of money, but a debt of honor. Jake saved the daughter of a chief. He treated her with kindness when he could have ignored her or worse. This debt could not be paid with simple thanks. It had to be answered with loyalty. Torak raised his voice so all the warriors could hear. He said they offered Jake the warrior's oath. They pledged their spears to protect him. While Jake lived on this land, no harm would come to him or his things. His enemies became their enemies. His safety became their duty. This was their way. This was their honor. As Torak finished speaking, every single warrior hit their spear on the ground 3 times. The sound was like thunder. It rolled across the valley. Birds flew away from the trees. Jake felt the vibration through the wood under his feet. Jake stood frozen. He could not believe what was happening. Kira stepped forward. She was limping, but the 2 warriors helped her. She held out something to Jake. It was a bracelet made of blue and silver threads. The pattern was beautiful and complex. Kira said this was a token of their tribe. If Jake wore this, all Valeri would know he was protected. She said he was a friend now, a friend forever. She took his hand and Jake let her. She tied the bracelet around his wrist. Her fingers moved fast through a complicated knot. When she finished, she looked up at him with tears in her eyes. She thanked him for saving her life. Jake felt his own throat get tight. He had not expected thanks. He certainly had not expected this. Part of him wanted to say no, to tell them it was not necessary. But he could see how important this was to them. This was not just about Kira or even about him. This was about their culture and their honor. To say no would be an insult. Jake looked at the bracelet on his wrist, then at Kira's hopeful face, then at Torak's serious expression. He spoke carefully. He said he was honored by this gift. He would wear it with pride. He promised to respect their people and their ways. He thanked them for trusting him. Torak nodded with satisfaction. He said something in his own language, and the warriors responded with a shout. The sound was fierce and happy at the same time, like a battle cry mixed with celebration. The chief turned back to Jake. He said his warriors would camp at the edge of Jake's property. They would not bother his work or his life, but they would be there if danger came. This was their oath, and they did not break oaths. Jake wanted to ask how long they would stay, but something told him the answer was as long as needed, which might mean forever. Kira spoke up again. She said she wanted to learn more about human ways, about his tools and knowledge. She asked if he would teach her. Jake looked at her curious, intelligent eyes and smiled. He said sure. He would be happy to teach her, and maybe she could teach him about her people too. He had a lot to learn. Kira's face lit up with joy. She said something to her father in their language, and Torak actually smiled. It was a small smile, but it changed his fierce face. He said his daughter was always curious. Too curious, her mother said. Maybe this friendship would be good for both of them. The ceremony seemed to be over. The warriors started to move. They broke formation and walked toward the forest edge. Some of them nodded to Jake as they passed. A few even smiled. Jake noticed they moved with great discipline. These were not random fighters. They were trained soldiers with years of experience. Jake now had 100 elite warriors sworn to protect him. What had his simple act of kindness created? Torak got ready to leave with most of his warriors. But he stopped and turned back to Jake. He said there was one more thing Jake should know. News of this oath would spread fast among the Valari people. Other tribes would hear that a human got protection. Some would approve. Some would question his judgment. But all would respect the oath because it was given. Jake had made powerful friends today. Torak hoped Jake never needed them, but they would be ready. Then the war chief walked away. His huge body moved with surprising grace. Kira stayed with 2 guards. She said she would visit often, to learn and to heal. Her father said she must rest her leg, but she could still talk and watch and understand. Jake said she was welcome any time. He warned her that farm work was not very exciting. Kira laughed. She said she thought he was wrong. Yesterday he lifted a tree that 3 strong Valari could not move. He used tools she never saw before. He healed injuries with devices that seemed like magic. She thought his work was very exciting. She started to go but looked back. She also said he had good food. That sandwich was delicious. Jake watched as Kira and her guards went to where the warriors were making camp. He looked down at the bracelet on his wrist. The blue and silver threads caught the sunlight. They seemed to glow. 24 hours ago, his biggest problem was a broken water pipe. Now he had 100 alien warriors camping on his land. He had a friendship with people he was taught to fear. His life just got very complicated. But as Jake went inside to make breakfast, he found himself smiling. Maybe complicated was not such a bad thing. Maybe this was the start of something good, something important. Or maybe he was being naive and this would end badly. Only time would tell. 3 weeks passed and Jake's life was completely different now. The Valari camp became a normal part of his property. They built strong shelters from wood and woven materials. The warriors kept a respectful distance from his house, but they were always there, always watching. At first, Jake found it strange to be watched all the time, but he got used to it. The Valari were professional. They did not bother his privacy or interrupt his work. They simply existed near him like quiet guardians. Kira visited almost every day. Her leg was healing well. The Valari medicine and Jake's first aid had both helped. She was endlessly curious about everything on the farm. She wanted to know how the solar panels worked, why the water system needed electricity, what made the crops grow in straight rows instead of wild like the forest. Jake enjoyed teaching her. Kira learned fast. She asked smart questions and remembered everything he told her. She understood systems and connections naturally. She reminded Jake of the best engineering students from his old job. In return, Kira taught Jake about Valari culture. She explained their tribal structure. She explained why honor was so important to them. She taught him basic words in her language. She corrected his terrible pronunciation with patient humor. She told him about their connection to the land, how they saw Haven's Ridge not as property to own, but as a living thing to respect. Jake started to understand why the Valari were hostile to human settlement. From their view, the colonists were invaders who took without asking and changed without caring. The warriors themselves started helping with farm work. Jake never asked them to. It started when a storm broke his fence and he was struggling to fix it alone. 4 Valari warriors just appeared with tools and started working. They did not speak much human language, but they understood the job. In 2 hours, they did what would have taken Jake 2 days. Their strength was incredible. They could lift fence posts that Jake needed machines to move. But they were also careful. They followed his instructions exactly. After that first time, the warriors volunteered regularly for heavy work. They cleared rocks from fields. They hauled water when a pump broke. They helped harvest when crops came in early. Jake tried to refuse at first. He felt uncomfortable with the arrangement. But Torak explained it simply during one visit. He said his warriors were there to protect Jake, but warriors grew soft without work. Letting them help kept them strong and helped Jake. Both sides benefited. Jake accepted this logic and started working with the warriors on bigger projects. The cultural exchange went both ways. The Valari showed Jake native plants he never noticed before. Some were good to eat and delicious. Others had healing properties. They showed him which trees meant underground water was near, how to read animal tracks to predict weather. This old knowledge combined with Jake's technology created something new. He designed a water system that used sensors, but also followed Valari ideas about water conservation and natural flow. The result was better than anything he built before. Jake also shared his supplies more freely. When he learned some warriors had infections from training injuries, he offered his medical kit. When food ran low during a hard week, he shared his stores without hesitation. The Valari noticed these gestures and gave back. They brought him fresh meat from hunts. They showed him how to preserve it using old methods. They gave him handmade tools that were incredibly well made. A friendship based on mutual respect was growing between Jake and the tribe. But not everyone was happy about these developments. Word spread through the human settlement about Jake's arrangement. Some colonists were curious and visited to see. Others were frightened and stayed away. The colonial administrator Greg Fletcher showed up one afternoon in his official vehicle. He was a middle-aged man with gray hair. He always looked worried. He had too much responsibility. He walked up to Jake's porch while looking nervously at the Valari camp. Fletcher said they needed to talk. Jake offered coffee, but the administrator shook his head. He said this situation was problematic. Jake had what was basically a private army on his property. The other settlers were concerned. Some were scared. Did Jake understand the position he was putting the colony in? Jake kept his voice calm. He understood their concern, but the Valari were not a threat. They were there because of a cultural obligation. They were not bothering anyone and certainly not attacking anyone. Fletcher leaned against the railing and rubbed his face. He said Jake was playing with fire. The Valari were unpredictable. Their culture was alien. One misunderstanding and those warriors could turn violent. There were protocols for dealing with natives. Jake was ignoring all of them. Jake felt angry but controlled it. He said respectfully that Fletcher's protocols kept humans and Valari separated for 30 years. Had that made things better? They still did not trust each other. Maybe it was time to try something different. Fletcher's face got red. He said different did not mean reckless. Jake was one man making decisions that affected everyone. What happened when other Valari tribes heard about this? What if they decided they wanted the same treatment? The colony did not have resources to manage complex relationships with multiple tribes. Jake understood Fletcher's concerns, but he also saw the fear behind them. Fear of the unknown.
Fear of change.
Fear of losing control. He had seen it before in his old corporate job when new ideas threatened the way things were. Jake said carefully that he was not trying to make Fletcher's job harder. He helped someone who needed help. That person happened to be Valari. Her people responded according to their customs. He was learning from them and they were learning from him. Was that not what they should be doing? Finding ways to live together peacefully? Fletcher sighed deeply. He said in theory, yes. In practice, it was complicated. He had families to protect and limited security. He could not afford to have the Valari become hostile because of something Jake did or did not do. Jake met the administrator's eyes steadily. He said the Valari had shown him nothing but honor. They had been there for 3 weeks without a single problem. They helped with work. They shared knowledge. They treated him with respect, and he did the same. Maybe if humans approached them as potential friends instead of potential threats, there would be fewer problems. Fletcher did not look convinced, but he nodded slowly. He told Jake to just be careful, for all their sakes. Then he got in his vehicle and drove away. That evening, Jake sat on his porch watching the sunset. Kira joined him. Her leg was now strong enough that she barely limped. She had been there during Fletcher's visit, though she stayed back respectfully. She said Jake's leader was afraid of them. Jake agreed. Yeah, he was. A lot of humans were. They did not understand Valari people. Kira was quiet for a moment. She said her people were also afraid of humans. They saw human machines and weapons. They remembered early days when some humans hunted Valari for sport until laws stopped it. Fear made people do foolish things. Jake thought about her words. He asked how they fixed it. How did they get past the fear? Kira smiled. She said they did what they were doing now. They talked. They learned. They worked together. Fear disappeared when you knew someone. When you saw them as a person, not as a monster. She pointed toward the warrior camp. She said her people were taught that humans were cold and greedy, but they watched Jake every day. They saw him work hard. They saw him share food and medicine. They saw him treat her and her father with respect. Their fear was fading. Maybe human fear could fade too. Jake hoped she was right, but he knew change was slow and people were stubborn. It would take more than one farmer and one Valari girl to bridge 30 years of separation. Still, it was a start. Every friendship started with one conversation. Every peace began with one gesture. Maybe what he and Kira were building could grow into something larger. Maybe other humans and Valari would see their example and try the same. Or maybe it would all fall apart the first time something went wrong. Jake did not know. He was just a farmer who helped an injured person. Everything after was beyond his control. The sun went below the horizon. The sky turned orange and purple. From the Valari camp came singing, a haunting melody that spoke of ancient times. Jake found it beautiful. Kira listened with her eyes closed and a small smile. She said that was the evening song. They sang it to thank the world for another day. To remember those who came before. To promise they would honor the land and each other. Jake listened more carefully, trying to understand the rhythm. He asked if she could teach him the words. Kira opened her eyes and her smile grew wider. She said she would like that very much. They sat together as darkness fell and stars appeared. The Valari continued their song and Jake tried to hum along. He got it wrong more often than right. Kira laughed at his attempts, but her laughter was kind. In that moment, sitting on his porch with an alien friend and warriors camped on his land, Jake felt something he had not felt in years. He felt hope. Hope that different people could understand each other. Hope that fear could be overcome. Hope that this strange friendship might lead somewhere good. He did not know what the future would bring. But for tonight, this was enough. The trouble came on a Tuesday morning 6 weeks after the warriors first arrived. Jake was in his field checking the corn when he heard engines. 3 trucks appeared on the road to his farm. They kicked up dust as they came closer. They were military vehicles with armor. They were painted red and black. Jake's stomach felt tight. He knew those colors. The Crimson Company had arrived on Havens Ridge 2 weeks ago. They were already making life hard for the colonists. The Crimson Company was a group of mercenaries who worked on frontier worlds. They offered protection whether people wanted it or not. If you refused to pay them, accidents happened. Fields burned. Equipment broke. Sometimes people got hurt. The colonial militia was too small to stop them. Administrator Fletcher filed complaints, but help was months away. The mercenaries did whatever they wanted. Jake heard they were collecting protection fees from farmers. He hoped they would leave him alone because his farm was small. He was wrong. The truck stopped in front of Jake's barn. 3 people got out. Jake recognized the leader right away. Linda Kane was famous among mercenaries. She had a scarred face and a reputation for being ruthless. She wore combat armor and carried a big rifle. 2 large men stood with her. Both had weapons. They walked toward Jake with the confidence of people used to getting their way. Linda stopped about 10 feet away and smiled. It was not a friendly smile. She said Jake's name. She said she heard interesting things about him. He was the farmer who made friends with the natives. That was cute. She looked around at his farm with obvious dislike. She said he had a nice setup. Decent crops and good equipment. Must be worth maybe 30,000 credits. Jake did not say anything. He just stood with his hands visible. He dealt with bullies before. Linda continued talking. She said Havens Ridge was a dangerous place. Lots of accidents could happen. Equipment failures and crop diseases. Mysterious fires. The Crimson Company provided protection against such unfortunate events. Very reasonable rates. For Jake, she thought 1,000 credits per month. Jake kept his voice steady. He said he did not need protection. He was doing fine on his own. Linda's smile disappeared. She said, wrong answer. Everyone on this planet needed their protection. Some people just did not realize it yet. One of her men moved closer and Jake tensed. The mercenary raised his weapon slightly, not quite pointing it at Jake, but making the threat clear. Linda spoke again with a harder voice. She said she would explain how this worked. Jake paid the fee or things started breaking. Today his water system, tomorrow his barn. Next week him. They did this 100 times on 100 worlds. It always ended the same way. Smart people paid. Stupid people suffered. Which was Jake. Jake opened his mouth to answer, but never got the chance. A sound erupted from the forest. A war cry so loud it seemed to shake the air. Linda and her men spun around as Valari warriors appeared from everywhere. They came from behind the barn, from the tree line, from the tall grass. In seconds, the 3 mercenaries were surrounded by at least 50 armed Valari. More were visible, moving into position further back. The warriors had weapons drawn and their faces showed no mercy. Torak walked forward through the circle of warriors. He was even more imposing than usual. His armor was polished and his spear was ready. He stopped directly in front of Linda. He towered over her by more than a foot. His voice was like thunder. He said this human was under Valari protection. He was a friend to the Cathara tribe. Threatening him meant threatening all Valari. This was a sacred oath. Did she understand sacred oaths? Linda's confidence was gone. She tried to recover, but her hand shook slightly on her rifle. The mercenary leader looked around at the warriors surrounding her team. Jake could see her thinking and calculating odds. She was a professional. Professionals knew when they were beaten. The Valari were not farmers with hunting rifles. They were experienced fighters trained for combat since childhood. Even with better weapons, 3 mercenaries could not win against 50 Valari warriors. Linda slowly lowered her rifle. She said they did not want trouble with natives. This was human business. They should stay out of it. Torak's expression did not change. He said when you threatened their friend, it became their business. He told her to leave now and not return. If she harmed Jake or his property, they would know. If she sent others to do what she could not, they would know. The Valari did not forgive threats against those they protected. One of Linda's men whispered something urgently. She looked at him, then back at Torak. Her jaw was tight with anger, but she nodded. She said fine. They were leaving. But this was not over. The Crimson Company had a long memory. Linda spat at Jake's feet. A final gesture of contempt. Then she and her men backed toward their trucks. They kept their weapons ready, but did not raise them. The Valari warriors parted to let them pass, but kept weapons trained on the mercenaries. The truck's engines roared and the vehicles turned around. They sped away down the road. The Valari held their positions until the trucks were completely gone. Only then did they lower weapons and relax. Jake realized he had been holding his breath. He let it out slowly and walked over to Torak. He thanked him. He said that could have ended badly. The war chief shook his head. He said no thanks were needed. They gave an oath to protect Jake. This was what protection meant. He looked at Jake seriously. But he said that woman was right about one thing. This was not over. She would be angry. Angry people did foolish things. They must be ready. Jake nodded, understanding. By helping him, the Valari made enemies. The Crimson Company would not let this go. Kira appeared from behind the barn. She had been watching the whole thing. Her face was pale but determined. She said that woman was dangerous. Her scouts had been watching the mercenary camp. They had many weapons and vehicles. They hurt other humans without care. Jake looked between Kira and her father. He said he did not want them getting hurt because of him. Maybe he should just pay what they wanted. Both Valari stared at him like he said something crazy. Torak spoke first. He asked if Jake would surrender to threats. Give power to those who used fear. Kira added her voice. She said if he paid once, they would demand more. Then more again. It never stopped until you had nothing left. Her people had stories of such people in their history. They were called shadow takers because they took everything until only shadows remained. You did not negotiate with shadow takers. You stood against them or you let them win. Jake felt something stir in his chest. Gratitude and responsibility mixed together. These people were willing to fight for him. The least he could do was stand with them. He said quietly that they were right. He would not pay, but they needed to be smart. The Crimson Company would not attack openly now that they knew about the Valari. They would try something sneaky, maybe sabotage. Maybe they would target other farmers and blame it on the Valari. They needed to think ahead. Torak smiled grimly. He said now Jake thought like a warrior. Good. They would increase patrols. They would watch the roads. If mercenaries came near his property, they would know. But Jake was right that they might try other methods. What did he suggest? Jake thought for a moment. He said he could set up security systems. Motion sensors and cameras and alarms. If someone tried to sabotage his equipment, they would have warning and evidence. Kira's eyes lit up with interest. She asked if he could make devices that saw in the dark and warned of danger. Jake nodded. He said it was basic stuff, really. He used to install security systems for corporate farms. He had most parts he needed in his workshop. Torak looked impressed. He said human tools were useful. This was good thinking. They would combine Jake's technology with their warriors. Very hard for enemies to surprise them. They spent the rest of the day planning. Jake showed Torak maps of his property. He explained where the weak points were. The war chief suggested putting scouts at key locations and setting up patrol routes. Kira wanted to learn how the security systems worked. Jake took her to his workshop. He pulled out sensors and cameras from storage. He showed how they worked. Kira watched with intense focus. She asked questions about power and detection ranges. She was a natural engineer and learned fast. By evening, they had a plan. The Volari would keep constant watch of approaches to Jake's farm. Jake would install sensors around important infrastructure like the barn and solar panels and water system. They would coordinate using simple radio devices that Jake modified. It was not perfect, but it was better than nothing. As the sun set, Jake felt more secure than he had since the mercenaries arrived. That night, Jake could not sleep. He kept thinking about Linda Kane's final words. This was not over. She was right. The Crimson Company had a reputation to keep. If they let one farmer defy them, others might get brave. They would hit back somehow. Jake hoped that when they did, he and the Volari would be ready. He got out of bed and walked to his window. In the darkness, he could see Valerie guards on patrol. Silent shadows against the night sky. He touched the bracelet on his wrist. The blue and silver threads were visible even in dim light. 3 months ago, Jake was alone on this farm. Just another colonist trying to make a living. Now he had allies and friends and enemies. His simple life became complicated and probably dangerous. But as he watched, the Crimson Company did not attack Jake directly. They were smarter than that. Instead, they started a campaign of terror against the whole human settlement. It started small with vandalism and stolen equipment. Then it got worse. Barns burned at night. Crops were poisoned with chemicals. Water systems were broken. The mercenaries were careful to leave no proof. They struck randomly so no one could predict where they would hit next. Fear spread through the colony fast. The colonial militia tried to help, but they were too small. Commander Peter Cole had exactly 15 trained fighters to protect over 200 colonists spread across hundreds of square miles. The Crimson Company had at least 50 mercenaries. All were veterans with military equipment. Every time the militia rushed to one attack, the mercenaries hit somewhere else. It was a losing game. Everyone knew it. Families started talking about leaving their farms, about moving to the main settlement for safety. But even there, people did not feel secure. Jake watched his neighbors suffer and felt guilty. He knew the attacks were punishment for refusing to pay. The Crimson Company was making an example, showing what happened when you defied them. Jake's own farm stayed safe because the Volari patrols made it impossible to approach quietly. But other farmers had no such protection. Jake tried to help where he could. He shared supplies and offered to fix damaged equipment. But it was not enough. The terror continued. Administrator Fletcher called an emergency town meeting 2 weeks after the attacks began. Every colonist who could travel came to the main settlement's community hall. The building was packed with angry and frightened people. Jake went with Kira at his side. She insisted on coming even though most humans would be uncomfortable with a Volari there. She said this affected her people too. If humans suffered eventually, they would blame Volari. They needed to be part of the solution. Jake could not argue with that. The meeting started badly. Fletcher stood at the front looking exhausted. He looked 10 years older than 2 weeks ago. He said they were facing a crisis. The Crimson Company was destroying their livelihoods. The militia could not stop them. He requested help from the planetary governor, but the nearest military was 3 months away. They needed to decide what to do. A farmer named Helen Carter stood up right away. Her voice shook with anger. She said they all knew why this started. Jake got friendly with the natives and refused to pay. Now everyone was paying for his stupidity. Other voices agreed. Jake felt dozens of eyes turned toward him. Many were hostile. He stood slowly and the hall got quiet. He said he would not apologize for helping someone who needed help. But she was right that his actions had results. The question was what they did now. Sitting there blaming each other did not stop the attacks. A young farmer named Danny Wu shouted from the back. He said it was easy for Jake to say that. His farm was fine because he had a private army. The rest of them were on their own. That was not fair. Kira stepped forward before Jake could answer. Her presence caused a stir. Some people never saw a Volari up close. She spoke in careful human language. Her accent was thick, but her words were clear. She said her people protected Jake because of a debt of honor, but they also protected him because he was a friend, because he treated them with respect when most humans feared them. If other humans wanted the same protection, they must offer the same respect. They could not defend those who called them savages. They would not risk their lives for those who wished them gone from their own land. The hall exploded in noise. People shouted questions and objections. Fletcher tried to restore order by banging on the podium. When the noise died, an older woman named Betty Harrison stood. She was a respected farmer who lived on Havens Ridge since the first settlement. She spoke quietly, but everyone listened. She said she remembered the early days. They had conflicts with the Valari back then. People died on both sides. They spent 30 years avoiding each other, pretending they could share this planet without actually talking. Maybe that was a mistake. Maybe they should have tried to build bridges instead of walls. Jake saw an opening. He said he was not claiming the Valari were perfect. He was not saying they should ignore real concerns. But right now they had a common enemy. The Crimson Company did not care about human or Valari. They were mercenaries who saw everyone as resources to exploit. If humans and Valari worked together, they might have a chance. If they stayed divided, they definitely lost. Helen Carter stood again. She asked what exactly Jake was proposing. That they all made friends with the natives and hoped for protection. That was not a plan. That was a fantasy. Kira spoke up again. She said it was not fantasy. It was reality. Her father was War Chief Torak. He commanded many warriors, not just those at Jake's farm. Other tribes listened to him. If humans agreed to formal alliance and if humans agreed to respect Valari territory and traditions, they could defend the settlement together. Humans had technology and knowledge. Valari had warriors and understanding of the land. Together they were strong. Separate, they were both weak. The room went quiet as people thought about this. It was a bigger idea than anyone expected. Fletcher looked thoughtful. He said they were talking about a treaty. Official recognition of Valari rights in exchange for military cooperation. That was a big step. Did Kira have authority to negotiate such terms? Kira shook her head. She said her father had authority. She could arrange a meeting between him and colony leadership. But humans must come with genuine respect. No more taking land without permission. No more treating Valari like animals. If humans could not agree to basic dignity, there was no point in talking. Her words were blunt but fair. Danny Wu stood again. His expression was still skeptical. He said, let's say they agreed to this meeting. Let's say they worked out some treaty. Could the Valari actually help fight the Crimson Company? No offense, but spears against rifles did not seem like good odds. Kira smiled slightly. She said Valari warriors might use traditional weapons, but they were not stupid. They adapted and learned. Give them access to human weapons and training, and they would show how effective they could be. They fought on this planet for thousands of years. They knew every hill and valley. They knew how to move unseen and strike without warning. Mercenaries were soldiers. Valari were hunters. Jake added his voice. He said he watched the Valari train. They were disciplined and coordinated. Their physical abilities were impressive. With proper equipment and coordination with the militia, they would be a strong force. More importantly, they were willing to fight. That was more than they had right now. Fletcher looked around the room. He was checking the mood. The anger had faded somewhat. People were thinking seriously. They were scared enough to consider options they would have rejected months ago. The administrator made his decision. He said, all right. He would meet with War Chief Torak. But he wanted representatives from the farming community present. This affected everyone, so everyone should have a voice. He looked directly at Jake. He said Jake would be there as mediator since he had the best relationship with the Valari. He also wanted Betty and Helen and Danny there. Different views would help them negotiate fairly. The three named farmers nodded agreement. Even Helen, who was angry earlier, seemed willing to try. The meeting went on for another hour. People raised concerns and asked questions. Some colonists stayed opposed to any alliance with the Valari. They said it was too risky, that it compromised human independence. But most seemed willing to at least try. When the meeting finally ended, Jake felt cautiously hopeful. It was not a solution yet, but it was movement in the right direction. Kira seemed pleased too. She said that went better than she expected. She thought more humans would refuse completely. As people left the hall, Betty Harrison came over to Jake and Kira. She studied the young Valari woman with frank curiosity. She said Kira spoke their language well. How long had she been learning? Kira smiled and said Jake had been teaching her for 3 months. She already knew some words, but he helped her understand better. Also, she listened to human radio broadcasts. Human music was strange but interesting. Betty laughed. A genuine sound. She said Kira was more open-minded than most of them. She was willing to give this alliance idea a chance. They did not have many other options anyway. Jake and Kira left the settlement and headed back to the farm. The drive took them past several properties hit by the Crimson Company. burned buildings and destroyed equipment and ruined crops. The damage was sobering. Jake said quietly that this was what happened when fear and greed went unchecked. The mercenaries did not see people. They saw profit. Kira looked at the destruction with sad eyes. She said her people had stories of such times in their history. Before the tribes united, they fought each other constantly. Many died for foolish reasons. It took a great crisis to make them see they were stronger together. Jake suggested maybe that was happening here. Maybe this crisis would force humans and Valari to finally work together. Kira nodded slowly. She said perhaps. But crisis also revealed true nature. Some people became brave. Others became cowards. Some sought unity. Others sought only their own survival. They would learn much about humans in coming days. They would also show much about Valari. The Crimson Company made their move 3 weeks after the treaty signing. Intelligence reports said they were calling in help from off-world. Their numbers grew to over 200 mercenaries with heavy weapons and air support. Linda Kane was done with subtle threats. She planned to crush the colony in one big assault. Jake's farm would be ground zero. It was personal now. Kane wanted to destroy the symbol of human and Valari cooperation. She wanted to show that her company was still the dominant power on Haven's Ridge. Jake learned about the planned attack from Valari scouts who monitored mercenary communications. They had 2 days to prepare. Commander Cole and War Chief Torak met at Jake's farm to plan the defense. The strategy was risky but brilliant in its simplicity. They would use Jake's farm as bait. They would turn the whole area into a carefully prepared battlefield. The mercenaries expected an easy target. They would find something very different. Jake's barn became the command center. He cleared out the farming equipment and set up computers and communication gear and tactical displays. It was not military grade, but it would work. The preparation was intense. Human engineers worked with Valari warriors to create defensive positions hidden throughout the property. They dug trenches and covered them with branches and grass, creating pit traps for vehicles. They placed explosive charges along likely approach routes, carefully mapped so defenders knew where to walk safely. They set up firing positions in the forest with clear sight lines to the farm. The Valari showed humans how to hide equipment using local plants and mud. The humans showed Valari how to set up electronic sensors and remote mines. Kira worked alongside Jake in the command center. Her role was to coordinate between human and Valari forces. She wore a communication headset that Jake modified for her. She practiced using the tactical displays. She asked Jake if he was scared. He thought about the question honestly. He said terrified. He was not a soldier. The idea of people dying tomorrow because of decisions he helped make kept him awake at night. But he was also determined. These mercenaries needed to learn they could not bully people. Kira nodded understanding. She said fear and courage were not opposites. The bravest warriors were always afraid. They just did not let fear stop them. The night before the expected attack, Jake could not sleep. He walked the edge of his farm in the darkness, checking preparations one last time. He found Torak doing the same thing. The war chief fell into step beside him. Torak said quietly that tomorrow they would see if their alliance was strong. Words and ceremonies were easy. Battle revealed truth. Did Jake think his people would stand firm when fighting started? Jake did not hesitate. He said yes. They saw what the Crimson Company did. They were fighting for their homes and families. People always fought hardest when protecting what mattered most. Torak was quiet for a moment. He said he fought many battles. He knew how to read warriors. Commander Cole was solid. His militia fighters were brave but inexperienced. They would need strong leadership tomorrow. Jake nodded. He said that was why Torak would be there. Joint Command, remember. The Valari warriors knew what they were doing, and the human fighters would take courage from fighting beside them. The war chief smiled grimly. He said he hoped Jake's confidence was justified. If they failed tomorrow, the Crimson Company would destroy everything they built. Worse, they would prove that cooperation between their peoples was impossible. The cost of defeat was too high to consider. Morning came with deceptive calm. The sun rose clear and bright. Perfect weather for farming or for fighting. Jake was in the command center early running system checks and reviewing the battle plan. Defenders were positioned and hidden. Sensors were active. Communication networks were working. Everything was as ready as they could make it. Commander Cole and War Chief Torak joined him, both wearing light combat armor. Kira arrived moments later with hot coffee for everyone. They drank in silence. each lost in their own thoughts about what the day would bring. The attack began just after noon. Sensors detected the mercenary convoy while they were still 5 miles out. 20 armored vehicles with 3 airborne gunships, more than enough firepower to level a small farm. Jake watched on the tactical display as the convoy approached along the main road. They moved fast and confident, clearly expecting minimal resistance. Commander Cole gave quiet orders over the radio, making final adjustments to defensive positions. Torak spoke to his warriors in their own language, probably offering final words of encouragement or prayer. The first vehicles hit the prepared traps exactly where predicted. The lead truck rolled over a hidden pit. Its front end dropped suddenly into the hole. The vehicle behind it swerved and triggered an explosive charge that blew out its tires. The convoy ground to a confused halt as drivers tried to figure out what happened. That was when the Valari struck their first blow. Energy rifle fire erupted from hidden positions in the forest. Valari warriors trained by humans and equipped with modern weapons targeted vehicle windows and exposed personnel with devastating accuracy. The mercenaries scrambled to respond. They got out of their vehicles and began returning fire into the forest. But the Valari had already shifted positions using their superior knowledge of terrain. The mercenaries were shooting at shadows and empty spaces while taking casualties from angles they did not expect. The airborne gunships tried to provide support, but Valari hunters with modified laser rifles focused fire on the aircraft. One gunship took multiple hits to its propulsion system. It was forced to make an emergency landing. The others pulled back to a safer distance. Linda Kane was no fool. She quickly realized this was not the easy fight she anticipated. She regrouped her forces and tried a different approach, sending infantry in a wide flanking movement. But the Valari predicted this too. Scouts in the forest tracked the flanking forces and reported their movements. Human militia fighters waited in prepared positions. When the mercenaries came out of the tree line, they walked into a killing field of coordinated fire from both humans and Valari. The flanking attempt collapsed. The mercenaries retreated in disorder. From his command center, Jake coordinated the defense like an engineer solving a complex problem. He watched sensor data and combat reports, then directed forces to weak points or opportunities. Kira worked beside him, translating orders and making sure both human and Valari commanders had the same tactical picture. It was chaotic and terrifying, but the system worked. The alliance that seemed so fragile in theory proved remarkably effective in practice. Human technology and planning combined with Valari combat skills and terrain knowledge created a defense that was greater than the sum of its parts. The battle raged for 3 hours. The Crimson Company tried everything: direct assault and flanking movements and suppressing fire followed by rushes. Even attempting to negotiate a temporary ceasefire. Nothing worked. Every time they thought they had an opening, Valari warriors appeared, or human militia fire drove them back. Casualties mounted on the mercenary side. The defenders, fighting from prepared positions with superior knowledge of terrain, suffered minimal losses. Jake saw the moment when Linda Kane realized she was beaten. The mercenary leader called a general retreat. Her forces began pulling back in relatively good order, but Torak had other plans. He spoke rapidly into his communicator. Valari warriors began moving through the forest, cutting off retreat routes. The message was clear. The mercenaries could leave, but only on terms the defenders dictated. Kane found herself surrounded with nowhere to run. She called for negotiations. Jake and Commander Cole and War Chief Torak walked out to meet her. The mercenary leader looked exhausted and angry. Her armor was scorched. She had a cut above her left eye. She stood with her remaining officers, maybe 50 fighters out of the 200 she started with. Kane said bitterly that they won. Her forces were not equipped for this kind of warfare. She underestimated them. Torak stepped forward, towering over the mercenary leader. He said she thought they were primitive. She thought humans were weak and alone. She was wrong about both. Now she would pay the price for her arrogance. Kane tensed. She asked if they were going to kill them. But Torak shook his head. He said they were not murderers. She would live. But she would leave Haven's Ridge with nothing but her life. No weapons, no armor, no vehicles. She would walk to the spaceport and leave this world. If she or her company ever returned, they would not be merciful again. The disarmament was thorough and humiliating for the mercenaries. They stripped off their combat gear and stacked weapons in neat piles. Valari warriors watched with weapons ready while human militia fighters collected the equipment. Kane looked at Jake with pure hatred. She said he made a powerful enemy today. The Crimson Company had resources he could not imagine. This was not over. Jake met her gaze steadily. He said yes, it was. She came to their world and threatened their people. She tried to take what was not hers. Now she was leaving with nothing. He told her to tell her company that Haven's Ridge was defended. Tell them humans and Valari stood together. Tell them they were not victims anymore. Commander Cole added his voice. He said they would be filing formal complaints with the planetary governor and the Galactic Commerce Authority. 6 months after the battle, Haven's Ridge had transformed into something remarkable. The human settlement and Valari territories were no longer separate worlds connected by fear. They were becoming one community with two cultures learning to live together. The change was not always smooth. There were still tensions and misunderstandings, but the direction was clear, toward cooperation and mutual respect. Jake watched this transformation from his farm, which had become more than a simple homestead. It was now a symbol of what was possible when different peoples chose unity over division. Trade flourished between humans and Valari. The main settlement's market now included Valari craftsmen, selling beautifully woven textiles and handmade tools and traditional medicines. Human merchants offered technology and processed foods and manufactured goods. The exchange went beyond simple buying and selling. It was about cultural sharing and building relationships. Jake often saw human children watching Valari artisans work, fascinated by techniques passed down through generations. He saw Valari youngsters equally interested in human technology, asking endless questions about how things worked. The most visible change was the joint community center built exactly on the border between human and Valari territories. The structure blended both styles, human engineering and materials combined with Valari design and craftsmanship. It housed a school where young humans and Valari learned together. Classes covered both species history and language and customs. It also had a medical clinic staffed by both human doctors and Valari healers who were learning from each other. The center had meeting rooms for the joint council that now governed shared matters affecting both peoples. Jake's official role was liaison between the communities, though his actual work was much broader. He helped resolve disputes when they arose, always looking for solutions that respected both cultures. He advised on technology transfers, making sure Valari who wanted to learn about human tools had access to training and equipment. He worked with Valari knowledge keepers to document traditional practices that humans could benefit from. It was exhausting but deeply satisfying. Every problem solved and every bridge built between the species felt like a small victory. Kira had become even more important to the Alliance than Jake. She now led the cultural exchange program, teaching both languages and customs to anyone interested. Her unique position as someone fully comfortable in both worlds made her invaluable. She could explain human thinking to confused Valari. She could translate Valari perspectives for puzzled humans. She had also become a voice for her generation, arguing that young people from both species should grow up together rather than separately. Her father Torak supported her efforts even when traditional elders questioned the pace of change. Administrator Fletcher had evolved too. The cautious man who once feared the Valari now openly advocated for deeper integration. He learned enough Valari language to hold basic conversations. He regularly attended tribal gatherings. He told Jake privately that he wasted years seeing the Valari as problems to manage rather than people to know. Jake replied that better late than never. Fletcher smiled and said he supposed so, though he wished he had Jake's instinct for doing the right thing from the start. Jake shook his head. He said he just helped someone who needed help. Everything after was everyone's work, not just his. The Joint Defense Force established during the crisis had become permanent. Human militia and Valari warriors trained together regularly. They served on combined patrols. They proved so effective that other frontier colonies were studying their model. Delegations from 3 nearby settlements visited to learn how Haven's Ridge achieved what many thought impossible: true cooperation between colonists and native species. Commander Cole gave presentations about the military integration, while Torak explained the cultural foundations that made it work. The message was consistent. Respect and genuine partnership were the keys. News of Haven's Ridge spread beyond the colony. Galactic media picked up the story of humans and natives defeating mercenaries through cooperation. Scientists and social researchers arrived to study the alliance. The planetary governor visited personally, bringing official recognition and additional resources. What started with one farmer helping one injured girl had become a case study in peaceful coexistence. Jake found the attention overwhelming. He tried to avoid interviews when possible, but Kira convinced him that sharing their story might inspire others. So he talked to reporters, always emphasizing that success required work from everyone, not hero worship of individuals. Jake's farm had expanded significantly. The original modest operation now included joint ventures with Valari families. They combined human agricultural technology with Valari knowledge of native crops to produce yields that impressed experts. The farm employed both humans and Valari working side by side. Watching them work together on daily tasks and sharing lunches and jokes, Jake sometimes had to remind himself how impossible this would have seemed a year ago. The bracelet on his wrist was faded now from months of wear, but it remained a constant reminder of where it all started. Not everything was perfect. There were still incidents and conflicts. A human farmer and Valari hunter got into a physical fight over hunting boundaries. Both were injured. A group of young humans vandalized a Valari sacred site, causing serious offense. Some Valari traditionalists objected to their youth adopting human customs and technology. Some human colonists still harbored prejudice and resentment. But the difference now was that systems existed to address these problems. The Joint Council mediated disputes. Community leaders from both species worked to prevent incidents from escalating. Most importantly, people on both sides wanted the alliance to succeed. They were willing to work through difficulties. One evening, Jake sat on his porch as had become his habit after long days. The sun was setting in brilliant colors, painting the sky orange and purple. Torak joined him, another habit they developed over the months. The war chief looked tired but content. He said he had been thinking about that day his daughter was trapped. If Jake had walked past, if he had ignored her suffering, where would they all be now? Jake thought about the question seriously. He said probably exactly where they were before. Two people sharing a planet but never really connecting, living parallel lives instead of shared ones. Torak nodded slowly. He said one moment and one choice changed everything for thousands of people. This was what his elders called a branch point. History flowing one direction, then suddenly splitting into a new path because of a single decision. Jake created a branch point that day. Jake felt uncomfortable with that. He said he just did what any decent person should do. Helped someone in trouble. The war chief smiled. He said exactly. That was his point. Decent action done without thought of reward created all of this. Perhaps that was a lesson humans and Valari both needed to learn. That kindness was not weakness. That helping others strengthened everyone. Kira appeared with 3 cups of tea, a blend of human and Valari herbs she had been experimenting with. She settled between the two men and they sat in comfortable silence watching the sunset. After a while, Kira spoke. She said she was teaching young children today, both human and Valari together. They were learning each other's languages through games. At one point, she watched them play and could not tell who was human and who was Valari. They were just children enjoying each other's company. That was when she knew they succeeded, not because they solved every problem, but because the next generation would not have the same barriers. Jake smiled at that image. He said that was the dream, that their children grew up seeing each other as neighbors and friends rather than aliens and threats. Kira nodded enthusiastically. She said her mother told her the true measure of change was what became normal. A year ago, humans and Valari learning together would have been shocking. Now it was just Tuesday afternoon at the community center. When something stopped being remarkable, that was when you knew it became part of the culture. Torak raised his teacup. He said to things that became normal, to cooperation that became natural, to friendship that became family. They touched cups together and drank. The tea was surprisingly good, sweet and slightly spicy. Jake thought about all the changes of the past year. The fear when he first saw 100 warriors outside his barn, the tension during negotiations, the terror of battle, the joy of victory, and the hard work of building something lasting. It had been the most challenging year of his life, also the most meaningful. He came to Havens Ridge looking for a quiet life after burning out in his old job. Instead, he helped build a bridge between worlds. Over the following months and years, the integration deepened. Mixed marriages began. The first was between a human engineer and a Valari artist who met while working on community center projects. Their wedding combined traditions from both cultures. It was attended by hundreds. The first human and Valari child was born 2 years after the battle. A girl with her father's dark hair and her mother's blue-tinted skin. She became a symbol of the future, representing what was possible when barriers came down. Jake attended her naming ceremony, an honor extended by the parents who credited him with making their love story possible. The morning of the meeting arrived with clear skies and cool air. Jake woke early and got ready carefully. This meeting would determine the future of human and Valeri relations on Havens Ridge. If it went well, they might make an alliance strong enough to face the Crimson Company. If it went badly, the divide between the two species would become permanent. The weight of that responsibility sat heavy on Jake's shoulders as he dressed and ate a quick breakfast. He arrived at the clearing an hour before the scheduled meeting to check things. The Valeri had set up a simple structure, an open shelter with a large table and chairs. It was built from natural materials but showed good craftsmanship. Around the clearing, Valeri warriors stood watch, not threatening but clearly present. Jake recognized many of them from the camp on his property. They nodded respectfully as he passed. Torak came out of a tent wearing ceremonial armor, more elaborate than anything Jake had seen before. The chief's presence was commanding without being aggressive. The human group arrived right on time. Fletcher led with Commander Cole at his side. Betty Harrison and Helen Carter and Danny Wu followed behind. All looked nervous but determined. Jake had spent the previous 2 days teaching them Valeri customs. Do not stare directly for too long. It seemed aggressive. Let them finish speaking before responding. Do not touch their shoulders or head. Those areas were sacred. The delegates listened carefully, and Jake hoped they remembered. Torak stepped forward to greet them. He put his right hand over his heart in the traditional Valeri greeting. He bowed his head slightly. The human group copied the gesture. Somewhat awkwardly but sincerely, Torak said good morning. He thanked them for coming. He said he was honored to meet representatives of the human colony. He asked them to please sit. They had much to discuss. Everyone took seats around the table. The atmosphere was tense but not hostile. Both sides seemed truly committed to making this work. Fletcher spoke first as the official colony leader. He said War Chief Torak they appreciated his willingness to meet. The situation with the Crimson Company had become unbearable. They needed help. They believed working together offered the best chance for both their peoples. But before discussing specific terms, he wanted to acknowledge past wrongs. Humans had not always treated the Valeri fairly. They took land without proper talk. They called Valeri primitive and savage. They excluded them from decisions that affected their ancestral home. For this, he apologized on behalf of the colony. The apology clearly surprised Torak. Jake could see the war chief thinking about Fletcher with new respect. Torak said that took courage. Among his people, admission of wrongdoing required great strength. He accepted the apology, but apology meant nothing without changed behavior. Words were wind. Actions were stone. What actions would humans take to prove they meant what they said? Fletcher nodded. He said that was a fair question. They were prepared to offer formal recognition of Valeri territory. They would establish a joint council to oversee land use decisions. They would share technology and knowledge freely, and they would include Valeri representatives in colony government. Betty Harrison added her voice. She said she lived here 30 years and saw how they kept the Valeri at distance. That was fear talking, not wisdom. Her grandchildren would grow up on this planet. She wanted them to grow up knowing the Valeri as neighbors and friends, not as threats. They needed to do better. Helen Carter, who was so opposed at the town meeting, spoke next. She said she would be honest. This scared her. Their cultures were so different. But her farm was attacked last week. They poisoned her grain and killed her animals. If the Valeri could help stop that from happening to others, she was willing to try. Torak listened carefully to each speaker. Then he pointed to the Valeri elders seated beside him. He said, "Let me introduce my advisors. This is Mira, Keeper of Tribal History. Beside her is Kale, Master of Warriors. And this is Sona, Healer and Wisdom Keeper. They help me make decisions that affect our people." He turned back to the humans. He said they spoke of sharing power and making joint decisions. This was good. But Valeri must see evidence. They heard human promises before. They faded like morning mist. "Show us one thing you will do immediately to prove you are serious." Commander Cole spoke for the first time. He said he could answer that. The militia was willing to begin joint training with Valeri warriors starting tomorrow. They would share weapons and tactics and intelligence. They would train Valeri fighters in modern combat and learn from Valeri knowledge of terrain. This showed trust because they were literally putting weapons in Valeri hands. Kale, the Master of Warriors, leaned forward with interest. He said this was an acceptable beginning, but they wanted more than just training. They wanted equal partnership in defending the colony. Not helpers, not servants, but partners. Fletcher agreed immediately. He said equal partners. The Volari would have full access to communication systems and intelligence about mercenary movements. They would coordinate all defense strategies together. No decisions about security would be made without Volari input. Danny Wu raised a practical question. He asked about command structure during combat. Who gave orders? Torak smiled slightly. He said that was a good question. It showed Danny thought ahead. He suggested dual command. Human commander led human forces. He led Volari forces. They coordinated together. Neither served under the other. Both worked toward the same goal. Commander Cole nodded approval. He said that could work. They would need clear communication, but the structure made sense. The discussion went on for hours. They negotiated territorial boundaries, establishing which areas would be only Volari, which would be only human, which would be shared. They agreed on resource sharing for water and minerals and timber. They established trade relations and cultural exchange programs. Jake mostly listened. He jumped in only when translation was needed or when technical details required explanation. He was impressed by how seriously both sides took this. There was genuine effort to understand each other's needs and find compromise. By late afternoon, they had the framework of an agreement. Sona, the Wisdom Keeper, spoke for the first time. Her voice was soft but carried weight. She said they talked much about land and weapons and security. These things were important, but she asked about hearts. Did humans truly want peace with Volari, or did they only want help until danger passed? Would they remember these promises when the mercenaries were gone? This was her concern. Not the words in the agreement, but the spirit behind them. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Betty Harrison answered with quiet conviction. She said she could not speak for all humans. Some would welcome this alliance. Others would resist. Change was hard and people were stubborn, but she believed most colonists wanted what everyone wanted: safe homes and healthy families and a good life. If they could achieve that together, then yes, they would remember. Not because they were noble, but because they were practical. Why would they go back to fear and separation if cooperation worked better? Sona studied Betty for a long moment, then nodded. She said this was an honest answer. She appreciated honesty more than pretty words. She supported this alliance. Torak stood and the others followed. He said he believed they had a foundation for agreement. They would write a formal treaty with all the terms they discussed. Both sides would sign. Both sides would be bound by honor and law. But before making it official, he wanted to seal this moment with traditional Volari ceremony. He gestured and several warriors brought forward a large bowl filled with water, mixed with blue flower petals. He said this was a ritual of shared trust. Each person drank from the same bowl. It symbolized that they shared fate now. What affected one affected all. The Volari elders each took a drink and passed it along. When it reached the humans, Fletcher looked to Jake for guidance. Jake nodded encouragingly. The administrator took a small sip and passed it to Commander Cole. The bowl went around the table until everyone participated. The taste was sweet and slightly floral, pleasant and refreshing. When the ceremony finished, Torak extended his hand to Fletcher in the human style. The administrator gripped it firmly. Torak said partnership. Fletcher agreed and said partnership. The warriors and colonists present cheered. As the formal meeting broke up, people mingled more naturally. Jake watched with satisfaction as human colonists and Volari warriors began tentative conversations. Kira had been there throughout, sitting quietly beside her father. Now she came over to Jake with a huge smile. She said they did it. They actually did it. She was not sure humans would agree. Jake smiled back. He said he was not sure either. There were moments he thought it would all fall apart. But everyone surprised him. They really tried to understand each other. Kira looked around at the mixing groups. She said this was just beginning. Real work started now. Building trust took time. She was right. They had an agreement on paper, but making it work would be challenging. Cultural differences did not disappear overnight. Prejudices would not vanish because of one meeting. There would be misunderstandings and mistakes, but at least now they were committed to trying. That was more than Jake hoped for when he first found Kira trapped under that tree. One act of kindness created ripples that led to this moment.